Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Peter Wittig, Director of Customer Experience and a co-founder at Motive.io. We're based in Vancouver, Canada, and we make a platform for enterprise VR training. So today we're going to talk about scaling VR training, the people who are involved, the tools they use, and how those affect the process and your ability to scale. So let's get started. So who's interested in doing this? Normally it's people or organizations that see the value of VR training over other methods. They've tried it, they've seen case studies from other companies, they've read research from reputable institutions, and they believe it. So when they do that, they typically know that they need a lot of VR training. So once people see the value, they see how rolling it out at scale will benefit their organization. More content used by more people means a greater benefit. So they usually need custom scenes, and these are 3D environments that mimic the real-world work environments of their employees. So they can perform the training in these virtual environments to make it as realistic as they can. They want a repeatable process and a way to reuse the scenes and the content they've already made in different ways. They typically have had previous VR experience. This usually means they've done so in a non-scalable way in the past, and they know that they need a better way to build VR training. Often these are large enterprise companies, not exclusively, but that's often the case. So what are the problems with scaling? So the main obstacles are the usual suspects: money and time. I often hear it costs too much or it takes too long. So why is that? So it's really the way it's being made. A lot of times people are given a task and they're not aligned with their skill sets. So this is a problem. They're being asked to do things that they're not necessarily qualified to do or good at doing. Conversely, there's usually people at an organization who have required skills to make VR better, but they lack the tools to be properly involved. And this causes a lot of delays and increased costs. So these are problems that are solvable and problems that can be fixed. So that's what we'll be exploring mostly today, is how these 3 things relate. So people, you're going to need people with certain skills, and most likely your company will have some of them, but not all. So knowing who you have and what they can do will help you define what tools you need. So with people, you want to ask, who do you have, what can they do, and who else do you need? With tools, you want to make sure that the people have tools that they can use. They want to match the skill set of the people on your team whenever possible. And when not, you want to make sure that the learning curve is within an acceptable limit. So what tools are required? What tools are available? Which tools can your people use? And do they work with tools that your people already use? All important to find out. Finally, process. Understanding the process for creating, updating, and maintaining your VR training content. People and tools and the tools they use will have a big impact on these processes. So getting this right is critical. Spend some time upfront to understand these processes and the ones you will use and why you're going to use them. That's going to help you scale. So there's a few different people involved, and we want to talk about each one and what skills they have and then how they're applicable to VR. So L&D, these are instructional designers, learning content developers, training professionals of any kind. So companies tend to have departments of L&D people. Their job is to train employees to do their jobs well and to do their jobs safely. This group is essential to creating custom or quality VR content. So Unity and Unreal developers, these people write code and create VR simulations in tools like Unity and Unreal. For the purposes of this talk, I'll often refer to this group as developers. I understand that L&D also uses that term for content developers, but for clarity, when I use the term developer in this talk, I'm usually speaking of a Unity or Unreal developer. So how these 2 groups interact is very important, and I'll spend a decent amount of time talking about just these 2 groups. So 3D artists, we need 3D models and we need 3D environments, and these are the people who create them. So this group may or may not have Unity or Unreal skills. It's good to find out. I often find out there's find that there's an assumption that they do have some of these skills. Some do, some don't. It's good to know. Finally, IT. They keep your network and your user data safe, and they generate a lot of data coming from this VR training. And so you want to ensure that the tools that are capturing this user data are safe to be on your networks and integrate with any existing systems. We're going to talk about that at the end of the talk. So let's look at a typical process for creating VR training and reasons why it does not scale and has issues. So here's how that works. So L&D will create a series of documents, spreadsheets, videos, emails to document a training procedure and any updates to that procedure, and then give that to developers. Developers will then code and create that in Unity or Unreal. So the developers then create a version of the VR app and deploy that on VR headsets. While that's happening, your L&D people are waiting. L&D then run through the procedures in VR and make note of any changes and updates that are necessary. If there are no changes required, you're done. If changes are needed, you'll have to go through another cycle. And while they're doing that, the developers are waiting. So each cycle takes approximately a few weeks. Ooh, there we go, just getting it up to there we go. And you'll need to go through several cycles before you get your final product. There's a few issues with this. These are a few of them. So one is that half your team is usually waiting on the other half. The big problem is that L&D, the people who know what the training should be, are on the outside of this process. They do not have direct control over the content. Now, this is normal custom software development with no tools for anyone except the developers. This is how the web worked in the late 90s and the early 2000s. You needed teams of developers to do anything. This has changed when tools became available for other people. So to be clear, you can definitely make quality VR content this way. However, the process makes scaling much more difficult and costly. So this is slow and expensive. Most companies will balk at the price of scaling with this process, even if you have a successful pilot. We tend to call this VR 1.0. This is not the only way. So let's look at why this process doesn't take full advantage of the people at your organization. So this is the same process. Here are the people involved. I've added 3D artists to this as well. All these people have specific skills. Here they are. What would make sense is that people who have particular skills do those associated tasks. That's not what happens in the process we just saw. This is what happens. The Unity developer needs to take them all on. That person gets input from the other people, but since they don't have the tools they can use, the Unity dev needs to take on all of those tasks. This is less than optimal. So here's an analogy. Let's say we want to make a new song and a way to play it. We're going to build a music box. So let's hire an engineer to build that music box. So this engineer is not a musician and cannot read music. We'll get a musician to whistle or hum the tune to the engineer until they get it. It takes some iteration to get there, but you'll get there. In this case, the musician does not have direct control over the content. The content is also part of the machine. So if we want to change the song later, we need to crack open the music box, make the changes, test it, and then send it back out. So that's an important thing to notice here, is that the content is part of the machine, and to change it, you need to change the machine. So obviously, I think it'd be easier if the musician had a guitar. Let's look at this process, though, in relation to what we just saw a moment ago. It's the same breakdown. So when the engineer is the only one with tools, the process is bottlenecked for two reasons. Different people can't work in parallel because they don't have a tool to do their job. And the engineer does not have the expertise that the other two people have, but they know how to do what they do well. So what can we do about this? So back to VR. So this approach is often explored when people encounter this issue. How can we upskill L&D and 3D artists on Unity? Generally, I'm a fan of organizations that encourage people to learn new skills, but they need time and support to make that work. And that brings up a few questions. So how much time do you have? Unity and Unreal are both fantastic products. I think they're both excellent. They're both complex products as well. So they take time to learn. How much time and how much are you willing to invest to get your people trained? Another thing to really remember here is in doing this, you're essentially making L&D and 3D artists part of your software development team. There are other skills and tools that they'll need to know to be effective members of that team. One is basic error handling. So both Unity and Unreal will throw errors. And if a newly upskilled person needs to stop working and go find a Unity dev every time this happens, that's not productive for them and it's not productive for the Unity dev. So they're going to need to know basic error handling skills. The other one is source control. This is one tool they'll absolutely need to know. This is how members of a development team manage changes between their Unity scenes and their code. Knowing how to use source control on a development team is essential to being part of that team. So they'll need to learn this too. So when you're upskilling people to learn Unity, they'll also need to know these skills. So before going down this path, start thinking about your expectations. I find that expectations can often be unrealistic here. Most people envision a sprint, but learning Unity or Unreal with no additional tools is really a marathon. So what normally happens is someone who's never used Unity or Unreal asks someone who has never used Unity or Unreal to get quickly upskilled. So as an example, if you asked me to run a 100-meter dash by next week, I could do it. I don't know that I'd do well, but I could do it. If you asked me to run a marathon by next week, I couldn't. Now, if you gave me a coach and several months, I could probably do it then. And that's a good way to think about upskilling with out-of-the-box Unity or Unreal. So you're probably thinking, maybe, and I hope that there's another way. There is. People need tools that match their skill sets. Those tools need to feed into Unity or into the VR app directly. So I think it's very clear from this picture why it makes more sense than having everyone go through the Unity developer. Everyone will be more productive if they have tools that let them participate in the VR creation process. Delivery speed increases and quality goes up. Everyone can work in parallel, bottlenecks are reduced, people do what they're good at. This makes a lot of sense. So this division of labor also makes it easier to utilize people outside of your organization. So if you don't have all of these skill sets in-house, you can outsource the ones that you don't have, but crucially, you can keep control of those that you do. This is a better way. So what do these tools look like? So there's a lot of VR companies and specializations that are happening in the market. That means the VR market is growing, and that's a good thing. Specialization means it's maturing. All positive signs. So almost every company has some form of services. Many have chosen a specific area of focus in terms of types of training or infrastructure. But those that provide SDKs and authoring solutions are the only companies that make tools to make VR training. These tools are what enable your people to use their skills to help you build VR training. So there's a lot of people who make custom VR content, and they're also looking for tools. So studios that specialize in VR training content are sometimes working with companies that make tools for building VR training. So there are relationships between these VR companies as well. So let's look at the types of tools and how they impact these different processes. So to be clear, Unity is an excellent product, and you need it to build custom scenes, and that's what people who want to scale VR need. They need custom scenes that interact with custom interactions. So Unity or Unreal is critical. However, it's not built to be a VR training product out of the box. So many of these new VR companies have decided to extend what Unity or Unreal can do. These kinds of extensions are what make these products successful and why Unity and Unreal are so useful. So these extensions, often in the form of an SDK, make it easier to do common tasks associated with building and configuring VR scenes and objects within them. These include common interactions with objects in a scene, like making it easy to pick up, make it grabbable, to use an item. This is going to greatly increase the speed at which your Unity devs can produce training. These normally come in the form of an SDK, as I said, and they belong inside of Unity or Unreal. They contain code, prefabs, components, and more. It's important to note that not all SDKs are the same. Some of these tools make it easier for 3D artists to configure models in Unity, others don't. Some enable services communications with external tools, some don't. Some communicate with an LMS, some don't. So ask what an SDK can do when talking to a company that offers one, and make sure that that aligns with what your needs are. One more thing here is authoring, and this is very, very important. Authoring is great as a great tool for L&D. This lets them get their content directly into the VR medium. I would say that, for the most part, it's right that L&D are front and center in VR training efforts. So authoring sometimes lives in Unity, sometimes it doesn't. And authoring makes it easier for L&D to be productive with the VR medium. But when authoring is inside of Unity, there's two things to remember. The L&D person needs the time and support to get upskilled on Unity. And all of the training will continue to be packaged inside the VRARA app, much like the music box we talked about a minute ago. So this is certainly a better way than not using tools, but it has implications when deploying training content to headsets that are already in the field. So this is authoring inside of Unity. Let's look at it outside. So authoring can live outside of Unity as well, and it has a couple advantages. First, L&D doesn't ever need to touch Unity or Unreal. So an SDK will know how to automatically retrieve content authored in an authoring tool. Now this point is really important. This is true when it's in Unity or Unreal or after it's been deployed. So say you've made a VR scene in Unity, you deployed it to a headset, you can then still use the authoring tool to change content and to make new procedures without needing to go back through Unity. So that means the content is not packaged in the VR app. And here's a good way to think about that. So think of a theater where a play would be put on. There's stage, lights, sounds, props, and an actor. So the play has a script. And the script says when the lights and the sounds are used, where the props are, and when and how the actor uses those props. When a script update comes through, the actors can give feedback. The writer can change the script. Light and sound can be easily changed. Props can be rearranged and reused. So the actor is the trainee. The L&D pro is the writer-director. The developers are the construction crews that built the theater. So when the authoring tool is outside of Unity, content can be changed without changing the theater, unlike the music box. Keeping this analogy in mind, let's look at the effect of having content both dependent on being in the VR app and independent of it, as we've seen with this analogy. So at this point, the situation is content has been created inside of Unity somehow, and your VR app has been deployed to several headsets in the field. An update needs to go out. Here's how it's done. So L&D requests or makes a change. The developer creates a build and deploys it to test headsets. This process gets repeated until the build has been approved. That's uploaded to an MDM solution. And then it gets distributed to headsets in the field. So a developer is required anytime you want to make a change. The key here is the need for a new build. If you can remove the need for a new build, you no longer need a developer for each change that gets deployed. So if you're using no tools at all, or if the authoring tool is inside of Unity or Unreal, this is the process that's required. So now let's look at the other process of saying when authoring is outside of Unity. So when it happens outside of Unity, here's what happens. The situation again is that your VR app has been deployed to headsets in the field. An update needs to go out. Here's what happens. So L&D decides to make a change, and they can do this on their own. They don't need to talk to anybody about it. They use an authoring tool to make the change and any adjustments. And then they can distribute that change via the authoring tool directly to the headsets in the field or through an LMS system. So there's no developer required here. So the updating and distributing is directly controlled by the L&D professional. Now, if you'll remember, This is very important because these are the people who know what the training should be. So they should be the ones with direct control of this content. You may ask yourself, do I ever need to create a new build? Yeah, sometimes you do, but sometimes is the key. Often you don't. The choice becomes, do you want to have to create a new build some of the time or 100% of the time, as you would with any other process that uses a custom VR scene? So this is a huge time and cost saver. This is something that's going to help you scale. So one thing I want to also point out about this is this idea of continuous improvement that can happen when you have authoring outside of Unity. So an example would be, I've got an L&D person who authors content and distributes it. A trainee will go through that content. Then data about that content and that session goes to an LMS or an LRS. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that infrastructure in a moment. But L&D can then see the reports of that data coming back and define areas of improvement. So they can then start saying, well, where are people getting stuck? Are they getting stuck on step 7 of a 10-step process? They can jump into their authoring tool, add step 7.5, and then watch to see, as more data comes in, if the learning outcomes improve. They're the ones in complete control of this because they're the ones that know what the training should be. It's also possible to create a particularly focused step. Maybe they're really having problems with step 7. So create an entire training session just on step 7. They have the control to do that. And because they do, you don't need the developer. You can bring costs down. The content gets produced a lot faster and training improves. So this is only possible when you have your authoring outside of Unity and L&D is in direct control. So I want to talk a bit about that LMS or an LRS integration, and we'll bring our friends from IT in here. So whenever you're bringing in a new tool, there might be infrastructure associated with that. So the tool and the infrastructure needs IT to sign off. And this is good because they keep your networks safe and your user data safe. So we want to help these people do their jobs, as does any good tools provider. So the best tools are standards compliant, and anything that gets installed is standards compliant. They also work better, or they'll feel more comfortable if they can install them on your networks. So this is something to ask for when you're looking at tools providers. And finally, if they're going to communicate with an LMS system that's already been approved and already on your networks, make sure that it's doing that in a secure way and using well-known standards. So VR tools companies will help the people in IT help you scale VR, but just make sure that you ask the right questions in advance. So this is a quick lightning round breakdown of why I think scaling VR training is critical for having the right people, having the right tools. So scaling VR training means a better trained, more efficient, and safer workforce. And I think everybody wants that. So process improvements in the creation, updating, and distribution of VR content will reduce their associated time and costs. You can achieve these improvements by giving the right people direct control over the VR content wherever possible. Control of the content depends on L&D professionals having tools they can use, as well as 3D artists. The right tools will fit their skill sets and can be learned quickly. When L&D pros have tools they can use, developers are involved less often. When developers are involved less, producing VR training, the time and the cost goes down. So once an L&D person has a VR environment, the right tools let them create VR training scenarios without the developers. So lower costs and faster in-house content creation will allow you to produce more VR training. This means more of your employees can benefit from it. Study after study shows that VR training will reduce training time, yield better results, knowledge retention improves, accidents happen less, and employees are better prepared to do their jobs. So as more employees use VR training, more of these impacts will be realized. So the impacts of improved training will result in an increase in savings overall. This makes scaling VR training possible. And this is because the right people have the right tools to do what they're best at doing. So thanks for attending my talk. My contact info is here. I'll be hanging out in the chat. happy to talk to anyone about that. You can always look at our website for more information or shoot me an email, hit me up on LinkedIn. But I'm going to actively jump into the chat. And if anyone wants to ask a question, let me know and I'll tap you in. Thanks so much. All right. So, yep, so I'm in the chat. Anybody wants to drop a question? Thanks so much, Christine. I'm glad you found it useful. David, thanks for coming. Miko, you too. Thanks, David. Appreciate you being here. Hi, David. Thanks for being here. Question, how does 3D and spatial audio contribute to overall training experience? Is it a key contributor to that experience? I suppose it depends on the type of training. First of all, that can increase the realism of it. So if you hear a sound behind you to the left or to the right, I think it's really, that adds to the realism of it. Particularly, think of something like safety training. If there's something that they need to look out for on a particular side, your brain is going to react in a much more natural and normal way if you hear it in the way that you normally would. So I do think that in certain situations, that makes a lot of sense to be able to add to it. Depends on the type of training, but I do think that can greatly enhance it. So I appreciate you asking, David. Sure. So a couple questions about the training tools you recommend to skill up in Unity and some of the authoring tools. Well, I will let you know that my company creates an authoring tool, so I would recommend that. There are plenty of others. It really depends on who else you have on your team. But as I was saying, the ability to split these different concerns and say, let people have a tool they can use. What we've done at our company is say, we've made it a web-based drag and drop authoring tool. And we let that connect via Unity SDK to a custom Unity scene. And so it lets L&D say, I'm just going to use this drag and drop web tool. The Unity devs can make the scene look and behave the way it should. And both of you can work at the same time to make sure that you're getting the product you need. And then again, the L&D people can control any updates that happen without needing to talk to the devs. So that's one of the ones we do. And if you're interested, I would recommend taking a look at our website. Or you can write me an email. Happy to talk about it with you there too. Let's see. And thank you for the question, both Chris and Christine. So Deb, what sorts of things do you think from a security aspect, like encryption, cloud-based, on-prem? Those are very good questions. And so when you're talking with a tools company, ask if those things are important for you getting them on in your company. Make sure that you get the list from IT of what's required, see what standards they're using, what options they will accept. And then when you're talking to a VR company, often a VR company has developers. Developers and IT can communicate very well. So getting those two people on a call soon and right at the beginning is the best way to know if there's going to be a fit. So I would strongly recommend getting a list from IT, giving that to a VR tools company, and then getting those two groups on a call as quickly as you can. That's going to be what I think is going to give you the best result. So thanks, Deb. That's a great question. So Daniel, so thanks. As usual, it's all about specification. So get the L&D people involved at the beginning and find an IT sponsor for integration, and then you're golden. If you don't have the right stakeholders involved, you're planning to fail. You absolutely need support internally. You're exactly right. I mean, if no one has any appetite to do VR training, you really need to begin by building a case. And it's, that's a whole nother topic, I would say. But that's exactly right. You need to have kind of the sponsorship internally and the club behind it to make that initiative happen. But in those cases, the best thing to do is to start small. say, let's do a small proof of concept, a small pilot, and you do it as a comparison against the way you're already training. And if you want, you can write to me, and I've put together things on saying, this is how you choose a good procedure for a pilot. And this is how you can compare it against something you're already doing to help demonstrate ROI. And ROI is usually what anyone cares about when they're making a decision of whether they're going to fund a project like this or not. So if you want, please send me an email, and I can send you some information about that, Daniel. So any other questions? I'm happy to stick around. My pleasure. Thanks for coming, Daniel. So until I see that number go down to about 1 or 0, I see 13 people still here. I'll hang out until everyone goes. And feel free to ask away when you do. Thanks, Isa. I appreciate you being here. Nice to meet you yesterday. We're down to 7. Ask away if you'd like. Oh, up to 8. All right, we're increasing. Hey, Chris. Sure. So, we started as a small company. There were, I think 3 of us at the beginning. And so one of the things that I like to do is be a bridge between business users and developers. I like to be able to talk to all of those groups. And so I enjoy getting into the technical aspect of it. I still do that. I enjoy working with customers to make sure that they can do the things they want to do, help them improve their workflows using the tools that we make. And then also being able to help make the case for people on the business side to say, this is why it makes sense. And the language you use and the terms you use for each of those groups tends to be a bit different. But knowing how to just listen to what I think people are trying to tell you, what it is that they want to get out of it, and then finding the best way to communicate that to people is something that I really enjoy. And so that's why I like kind of having a bit of I suppose a foothold in each of those spots. So that's why I'm kind of where I'm at. And also it's based on what do we need people to do as you grow a company. We've got 20 plus people now. You find that there are things that need to get done, and so you jump in and you do them, and that's a really fun and exciting challenge. And I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for asking. It's true. I often find it's interesting too that the terms that people use, you can use the same term in many different contexts, and it means entirely different things to each of those different groups. And you start to recognize quickly when you say a word, and then one group starts looking at you a little strangely, and you realize, you say, well, what do you mean, or what are you hearing when you hear that word? And then starting to learn those different languages, and then what is their motivation? What is it they want to accomplish? What's going to make them feel like they're doing their job? What's going to make them feel like they're achieving what they need to achieve? So yeah, I'm with you on that, Chris. Okay, we still got 7 folks here. It could be that people have gone to get a cup of coffee, or they're just hanging out because we're still streaming. So any other questions? Happy to answer them. I'll give it to let's say 9:40, and if I haven't heard anything, I'll shut it down. Thanks, Chris. Yep, I completely agree. Strong, measurable, deliverable is very important. I would even add to that, have something that would have an immediate and measurable deliverable. So not something that's going to take a while to show up, but something that's going to be, something that's going to show up and have an immediate impact as that goes along with that measurement. But I agree with you there, Daniel. Yeah, I mean, things, and I find with training, especially a proof of concept, is to say, if this is training that's happening often, that's going to be something that shows an immediate impact. You get new employees that are coming through, and that's taken, 2 weeks to train them. If you're going to say, I'm going to do a proof of concept and I'm going to reduce that to 1 week or less, and you're doing this almost continuously with new people, yeah, people are going to say, wow, okay, yes, let's do more of that, because it just makes it clear. And then, you've got that measurable angle as well, as you mentioned. Yeah, on the same page there. Thank you. And we've got a few more minutes if anyone wants to ask any other questions. Okay. I think I'll leave it there. Thanks everyone who's still here for being here. Please reach out to me. My email is listed there. You can get me on LinkedIn, and I'll be at the conference. So I appreciate you being here. Have a good day.